So here I am this morning visiting Ken Broten. He's from Ottawa, Ontario, and he lives in the West End in Canada. He's a model railroader, and we're going to have a look at his layout today and talk a little bit about his experience with railroads and his interest in the hobby. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Chris.
So Ken, tell me a little bit about where you got started in all this. What generated your interest in trains?
Well, my dad was an employee of the CNR, working out of Edmonton, out of the Calder Yard when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
So we grew up in a railroad household.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, he was very much involved in the union, so there was almost always railroaders in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young lad, he used to take me down to the Calder shop and walk into the roundhouse and see these beautiful steam locomotives sitting there on the maintenance tracks, hissing and smelling of hot oil and steam.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of got my interest started early at that stage.
Did you get a chance to get up on the trains and actually ride in them?
Not at that age.
Oh,
I
okay.
came much later in life.
Okay.
Yes.
But just seeing them at a young age, those wheels were taller than you.
That's right, they were.
And I guess there's a certain energy that you find in those yards and the trains moving and things like that.
Yes, yes. Dad took me down there every so often, not too often, but every once in a while he'd take me down and show me the trains.
Yeah. So did you have trains as a hobby at that age?
No.
Oh,
no.
interesting.
When I was a little bit older,
Yeah.
I did have a set of Marks 027 gauge loop with a couple switches and
Yes.
some cars. Not that I played with down in the basement for hours on end.
But it didn't sort of stand out in your life as being your favorite toy or anything like
Well,
that?
probably a little bit at that time.
Yeah.
It did, but then eventually it got packed up and put away.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until much later in life that trains came out again.
As you got older, your dad would get you out and do a bit of rail fanning. So even as it was his job, he had a passion for the trains and liked to get out there.
Well, yes, he did. From time to time, there might have been a derailment. They happened occasionally, and he was kind of prone to want to go out and take a look at them.
Yes.
Partly because he was a union representative and wanted to know more about it, but just it was an interesting outing for us as a family. We'd go out and drive out, find these steam locomotives buried in the gravel at the side of a track.
So that must have created kind of an odd sense for yourself about what trains were about.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
It was just these were mechanical machines, and mechanical machines interested my dad, so he interested me. Actually, Dad got started before he went railroading, in that he was interested in the steam tractors used in Saskatchewan, and because that changed the way they farmed at the time. So all his life he's interested in steam, either the tractors or the steam locomotives. As a matter of fact, he actually kept his steam ticket open right up until the day he retired.
So his employment with the railroad covered quite a few different aspects of the work then?
It did. He started in Jasper in the stores department, and then we moved to Edmonton, and Dad became a fireman.
Right.
Worked his way up through the fireman's board, and then worked his way up through the engineer's board till he finally retired after some 34 years.
So your interest in the hobby sort of has come from your family background, but also too there has to be more to it than that. Because a lot of people are raised in and around trains, and my fine example is a friend of mine who lived right next to the tracks and unfortunately had to go outside and take the laundry off the lawn as the steam engine went by every time because the laundry would get dirty. So your experience was positive, but there had to be more than that to drive you into the hobby and say, yeah, this is something that's tremendous. I really want to do it.
Well, it's a hobby that is creative. You get a chance to build something. And
Yes.
building things has been something I've we've done all my life. Dad started to teach me from a young age to use tools,
Right.
to do things, build stuff. He built things around the yard, around the house, the garage. He actually built the house itself when I was younger. But so building things was something I learned to do at a young age.
So in building model railroads, had you built many before? Or?
I started to build one with my son when he was young. It was just a single sheet of plywood,
Yeah.
and we tried to build a couple of ovals and some hills and stuff onto it. Didn't know what we were doing, didn't know how to go about it, made a lot of mistakes. It worked sort of, but not well. And eventually his interest wasn't all that strong and it got put away. But it wasn't until, as I was approaching retirement, I started thinking about, well, I need a hobby. I'm not going to just slow down and stop here. I want something to keep going with. So started thinking about it and decided at that point that building a model layout is something that has a lot of potential going forward.
When you went to look into it, how did you go about that? Obviously retiring, did you know people in the community that were in model railroading, or how did that happen?
Not initially.
Okay.
Not initially, no. The people that worked with me at work caught on that I was getting interested in trains, and they were probing, what are you going to do after you retire? And I said,
Yeah.
well, I think maybe I'll build a model railway. When I
Yes.
actually retired, they bought me a box with a locomotive and some cars and an oval in it as a going away gift.
Yeah.
That really got it moving. So
How many years ago was that now?
That was 7 years ago.
So everything that you've accomplished has been basically over the last 7 years.
That's correct.
In this current layout.
Yes. Yeah, so I started surfing the internet and reading and whatnot, and eventually I stumbled across OVAR and went out to the meetings and started talking to people and visiting layouts. And
Well, you're married
yes,
and you live in this wonderful house here. It must have been quite a step to go from suddenly being interested in building a layout to take a finished home and find a spot for trains. So can you describe a little bit of that thinking and process of how that worked?
okay, well, as you said, it was a process.
Yeah.
The room where we started was what I now call the Edson room. Was a computer room
Okay.
initially, and I had purposed one wall on the side, and I designed a wall switching layout.
Yeah.
My wife looked at it and said, you're not going to be happy with that for long. Draw me up one that went all the way around the room. So I worked on the computer. I used a CAD package on the computer anyway.
Yeah. And that was your background in computer science, so you're
Yes,
very
that's
familiar
right,
with
yes.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So was it a rail CAD that you
it was
used?
AnyRail.
AnyRail,
Product,
okay.
yeah. I used that. So I designed layouts. We saw Mike Hammer's layout, picked up some ideas, tried stuff, and the room was probably about a foot too short in two directions to do what I would have been comfortable doing. It
Just for
didn't
radius
quite
and
work.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't quite work. It was a little too tight, a little too tight. The curves are too tight. And so we were out, we'd been out to Mike Boucher's place and a few other places, and when I came home, Faye said, well, why don't you draw up a plan where we knock a hole through the wall over here and take over the storage room over here and put a layout into that.
True.
So I spent many, many hours putting together a possible layout. It was starting to look pretty good.
So then you went to the president with the plan?
Yeah, it went through many, many iterations. I was
Yes.
just looking at the CAD package, and I think I was up over about 70-some versions of it as it evolved over time.
Yeah. I guess during this period as well, you were seeking other information and opinions from other people?
That's correct. I was
Yeah.
visiting layouts, I was talking to people, I would show people the drawing at the club, and they would look at it and give me some ideas and suggestions.
So that whole process of stepping out as an individual in the hobby to get involved in what's going on in the community of model railroading, how did you approach that?
Well, I guess I just went to the meetings. And
Okay, so
started
there were
talking to
organizations locally that you became aware of? Or?
people. No, no.
So how did you know about meetings and things
Well,
like that?
somehow I came across OVAR.
Oh, okay.
So initially,
Yeah.
I don't even remember
That's
now
the
how.
Ottawa Valley Associated Railroaders.
That's correct.
And they're just a bunch of guys that like trains.
That's right. And
You met people through
I
there.
met people through that. And
Yeah.
from there, we visited layouts.
There's also a learning curve, I guess, in terms of deciding the products that you want to use and how you're going to incorporate it in the layout, scenery methods and techniques and everything, a lot of different things.
Yes.
So what would you suggest to people in terms of, if you know nothing about the hobby, how to go about doing that?
Well, what I did is I started by surfing the web,
Yeah.
looking for information, and there is a phenomenal amount of information on the internet. And I started reading different articles and chat lines and blogs, things like that,
Yeah.
that people had up there, to just see what they recommended. And then I would, as I learned a little bit there, from that I started learning enough to be able to ask questions at the club that would bring me back some inputs. I was able to, try and find out, do you go Digitrax, do you go Lens, and of course
Yep.
there's camps on both sides that say theirs is the greatest.
Yes.
It's the way it is. I settled on Digitrax primarily because of the availability that I perceived at the time, and it seemed to be popular amongst the people that I spoke to.
It's interesting, many people when they're starting in the hobby is really relatively late like yourself, they're sometimes all over the map in terms of products and interest. Do I want steam? Do I want diesel? Do I want to do this railroad or that railroad? Or do I want it to be a freelance kind of thing? It looks like when you come across your concept that you had something very specific in mind.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I decided early on that I wanted to model what I was familiar with, which was the Edmonton to Jasper area. There's
Right.
a long piece of track between those two places.
Yes.
A lot of boring track if you're running on it. But you've got Edson, you've got Jasper, you've got Hinton along the way. So there was things happening along the line where you could model it when you compressed it down and got rid of all the miles of nothing in between, where you could compress it down to where the action was. So I was interested in that because I was familiar with it,
Right.
and decided that that would be my locale. I chose 1956 as my era because of the transition from steam to diesel. Again, because I like steam,
Yes.
but I also like the diesels. And I recognized I studied, read about it a bit, and then kind of became more familiar with why the railroads transitioned from steam to diesel. Learned about the transition from coal-fired steam to oil-fired steam, and then the introduction of the diesels. I learned a little bit about that, and so I settled on that and says, that's what I'm going to build around.
So at that point, then you had to go finding the products that match that. That isn't always the easiest thing. You just can't go down to your local hobby shop and say, there it all is. I'll take one of those and two of those and three of those.
Exactly. That's been an exercise. I've purchased a number of things and got them home, a few of them, and just started, oh, that's a little too modern for my era.
Yeah.
So I'll trade that one off with somebody else when I find something else. I've been quite fortunate in that I have been able to accumulate rolling stock and stuff that was built prior to 1956. I've wound up with a few cars that are later than that, and as I said, I'll be looking for an opportunity to trade those.
Yeah.
And I stuck with CNR because that's what I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Now out here in Ottawa, CNR is as dominant as CP is in terms of available parts in the stores. A lot of people are modeling CP here.
So
But
do
there are
you
CN.
use the internet at all to purchase stuff?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And visiting the local shops and talking to people and
Trading with people, eh?
yeah, trading with people when I get a chance.
There's a lot of good second-hand market, especially for the era that you're modeling.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I would recommend, if you're buying used stuff, get it from people that you've got to know. I can see how very easily used material coming, say, off the internet carries with it a risk that it might not run well, and
Yeah.
that's why they're getting rid of it. Whereas if you're getting it locally, you're more likely to be working with somebody who is conscious of the fact that they want it to run on your railway as much as it did on theirs. Some of the guys have moved their era. They've said, well, I've done the older era now. I want to do a more modern one because I want to move into traffic control and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so they says, I got rolling stock here. I don't need anymore. Yeah, so I'm running out of space put on the layout.
Well, I think we should have a look at your layout, maybe go through it room by room. It's unique. It's in 3 different areas, and we can look at some of the innovative things that you've put into place and how you approached building your layout.
Okay, let's do
Okay.
it.